Hello, good afternoon and welcome, or good morning, depending on where you're at. Good morning and welcome to the latest edition of Frankly Speaking. My name is Frank Raimondi. I will be your host again and give another minute or so just to let people come on. But again, thank you for attending. Okay, we've got a good attendance. So let's get going. Again, my name is Frank Raimondi. I'm VP for Channel Alliances and Partnerships at Nodeware and IGI Cybersecurity. We're two companies in one, basically offering both continuous vulnerability management and a series of professional services around cyber, such as pen tests and compliance readiness, which is our topic today. This is generally going to be a discussion. No slides. We bring up a couple references as needed, but really we want to help everyone sort of understand the terms, the dates, the acronyms, the world of CMMC as it is today. So hopefully we'll get some clarification to you and educate you along the way. Again, we'd love your comments and questions along the way, or even after the session. For those listening on the recorded materials, again, please reach out, ask your questions. We'd be happy to answer them. We did get a lot of great questions submitted ahead of time, so we will go through. So thank you very much for those. We'll make sure at the end, if we haven't addressed them specifically, we'll come back and go through all of those. So today's topic is really, again, what MSPs need to know about the final rule of CMMC. There is, it's been ongoing for a long time, but we want to kind of take today to kind of go deeper from our discussion last month around services and how to add services to your portfolio and to your offerings. And so, we're going to talk today about what it is, why does it matter for you and your customers. So 3 key takeaways we hope you'll understand, you'll come across with. One is understanding the final CMMC requirements and maturity levels. 2 is how CMMC affects your own organizations, as well as your clients' current and future Department of Defense contracts. And we'll put that DoD with an asterisk, meaning there could be other parts of the government that could be adhering here. And then 3rd is, practical steps to prepare for compliance, including partner with readiness specialists, such as our guest speaker and others. And we will have some other materials to follow up with. So let me introduce our guest speaker of the day, Wayne Proctor. Wayne, if you want to join, and let's get started. There we go. Good day. So Wayne, before I ask you the really important question, Emma, go ahead and introduce yourself, give a little background so people know where you're coming from and what you do today.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Wayne Proctor, working for IGI Cybersecurity, and my role is to be a cybersecurity consultant. And what I'm doing largely is helping people with their compliance needs and also serving as a virtual CISO for multiple companies. In the past, I've been the actual CISO for 7 different companies, so I have a good background in that. Great.
And just some big companies that everybody would know, as well as some smaller companies that people might not know. So you have a great career behind you, and we appreciate you working with us at IGI and all you're doing to help our customers. So, all right. So as tradition on this show, we have to ask our guests a favorite Frank, right? So this is Frankly Speaking. So somebody maybe somebody famous, somebody not famous, fictional, real. Who would you think of as your favorite Frank?
Well, this probably isn't going to count, but when you just said that, the first thing that came to mind was Frankfurter, because I just love the Frankfurter hot dogs. But that's not a person, but that's my favorite. My favorite Frank. Yeah.
When we've gone through this before, I always sort of think of different Franks. I think of Frank Lloyd Wright and Frank Barone on Everyone Loves Raymond, but I kind of like the one I've been thinking about today was Frank Abagnale from famous from To Catch a Thief, and played in the movies, and he really kind of turned himself around from a criminal to a supporter and a really a big cyber implementer and supporter of trying to help people get defrauded less, and did some really interesting things and has a great book. So, all right, enough of that. So Wayne, right? CMMC's been around for a long time, just as a term and as a promise, if you will, or a threat, depending on your point of view. So maybe give a little background, what it is, who's it for, maybe what it stands for. I'm just thinking about, what does CMMU stand for, and who is it impacting? Just kind of a general discussion. Let's just hear what's going on.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a good question to start. And some people know a lot about it, some don't. So maybe this will get us more all on the same page to start. But CMMC is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. So let me tell you a little bit about how it came to be, where we are now, just the history. Some of you may not know it. So in the early 2000s, there were growing concerns about security of DoD sensitive information held by contractors. And there were data breaches, and people started to say, what are we going to do about this? This needs to be controlled. So what they finally decided to do in 2016 was into all DoD contracts to put a requirement that DoD contractors needed to be compliant with the NIST 800-171. And that framework is specifically developed for contractors who have information from the government. So it's how to protect that government information by contractors. So they said, well, we'll just make it a requirement in contracts and then problem solved. They also said in that same law or contract requirement that we're also going to require that if there is an incident, you have to report it to us within 72 hours. And these prime contractors that we have the actual contracts with, they need to flow down the requirements. So they need to make sure, or we can penalize them, that their subcontractors are also following all these security rules in the 800-171. So sounded great on paper, but what they found was that companies actually weren't doing it. There was no process really to follow up and to prove that it was really being followed and that the different controls were really in place. So what they did is they said, well, now we need some way to certify this, some way to really verify. So that's how they came up with CMMC. And the first version of that came out in 2020. And they basically said that, we're going to now use this process to verify, have third parties go out there and help us verify that the controls are in place. So people need to get certified by a third party. And then, it progressed and matured. Recently, it did become law. It was published in the Federal Registry that what are the rules for CMMC? And that was called 32 CFR, the final rule for what is CMMC. So if you all are interested, you don't have it, we can send you the link, but it just basically breaks down what is CMMC and how does it operate and how do you get compliant. But then they weren't at that point allowed to put it in actual contracts. So there's a new thing that had to happen, which just came out. And that was actually the final rule, which was the 48 CFR, which was making it so that all the contractors would be required to be CMMC compliant. And it's going to go in a phased rollout. We're going to talk about that shortly. But anyway, that's how we got to where we are today. It's really because contractors weren't putting into place the rules, the government thought they had to verify that it was really being done. So that's how this all came to be. One other thing, Frank, I just wanted to let people know, it's a little bigger than that. Now we're talking about companies needing to get compliant with CMMC, and that's estimated by the DoD to be around 80,000 companies need to get, or 80,000 DoD contractors need to get compliant. So that's just a real, groundswell of companies that need to go through this. So it's driving a lot.
Contractors and subcontractors as well, right? I mean, it's people supplying to a contractor, including MSP potentially. We'll get to that in a minute, but it's a wide range of impact.
Yeah. So if you're a subcontractor working for someone that has a DoD contract, you're going to be contacted by them, if you haven't already, to prove that you are on the way to becoming CMMC compliant. And if you're not willing to do that, they're just going to go find some other subcontractor. They need to guarantee that their subcontractors are CMMC compliant. So you're going to see a lot of primes reaching out to make sure they have the right subcontractors in place. But the other thing I wanted to bring up, Frank, just because I think the audience, if they don't know this, they should know, there's a lot of other government entities beyond the DoD, a lot of other federal agencies. So all these other federal agencies now, they are requiring that companies meet these DoD, or not DoD, they meet the requirements for, they call it basic safeguarding of FCI, not CUI, but really federal contract information. That's in their contracts, but that's not being verified now. So we're going to see, and those are actually, those basic safeguards are exactly the same controls as CMMC level 1. So you're going to see a lot of other companies needing assistance to make sure that they're at the CMMC level 1. And, there's a lot of talk that in 2 to 4 years, that's going to be more of a mandate. And that could be another 100,000 companies on top of the 80,000 already. Yeah. So that's just another thing people should keep in mind.
Well, I mean, I think the implication for an MSP that's, if you're, all right, if you are got some customers, or you have customers that have customers supplying to the DoD, right, there are going to be requirements based on you. And these smart ones, as you said, that are seen down the line, right, if the core requirements are important to manage to, then you will have a much broader market to support eventually, right? So a lot more customers are going to be needing those same levels of support and compliance. So now you mentioned the 48 CFR rule. So is that what was just announced 2 weeks ago? Is that this final rule that now people are realizing, I got to get going on this, right? Is that?
Yeah, the CMMC 48 CFR final rule that you were just talking about, Frank, that is the part that makes this real for people. And
with real teeth on it from implementation and monitoring standpoint, certification.
Yeah, but what it basically says is that if you're not CMMC compliant at the level you need to be for the contract you're trying to win, then you can't get the contract. So it just basically takes you out of running to, get revenue, if that's what you do.
Or keep the revenue if you're already supporting that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's go into that, Wayne. Let's talk about those levels. And I think maybe if you want to bring up a chart, we can do that. But there are different levels, 1, 2, and 3. Explain what they are and who they're for, and what level. Just explain what they are, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So with CMMC, there's 3 levels, and you get guys that are watching online can see the chart just came up. But in the 3 levels, the first one is really for protection of federal contract information. So if you're a company that, or have a contract that doesn't have access to CUI, you only really have information about the contract itself, then you only need to be level 1 compliant, and that's a self-assessment. That's a self-assessment that is done annually. And you basically need to verify that the 15 basic controls, and we said these basic controls are really contractually required by all the different contractors of all federal agencies, not just the DoD. But for CMMC, you have to take a self-assessment, go online. The government has a system called SPURS. You basically go online and attest that you have all these controls in place. But you don't want to, it's very dangerous for you if you go in and just attest and you don't actually have the controls in place, because there's a False Claims Act that if you are collecting money from the government and you lie, basically that you have security controls in place, but you don't, then you can have some heavy fines and have your contracts taken away and just a lot of penalties. But basically that level 1 is just a self-assessment, but there is going to be a good amount of demand for making sure those controls are put in place, and that, you know, they're going to be these companies are going to be reaching out for help in a lot of cases. Help me verify that I have the controls properly in place.
So Wayne, just thinking about those, just on those 15, just what would be some examples of those, just to try to be as specific?
Yeah, they're really fairly basic controls. You know, one of them is to verify that you have access control given only to the people that should have the access, that you've identified the people, the processes, the devices that are allowed to have access, and that you control it. So they're pretty basic controls, but for all the CMMC things, you got to define your scope really clearly of the systems involved, and then make sure that you're really doing what you say you are. So even though they're basic controls, there's some steps you really need to go through.
Okay, great.
So on the level 2, this is really where the rubber hits the road and where you need to start getting assistance to prove you are compliant from a third party, and they call that a C3 PAO. Those are the groups that do the actual assessments. So there's 2 different types of level 2, and one is really, they call it non-prioritized, but really, if you have very unsensitive CUI, you have to get approved by the government or by the DoD, but you could be approved to do a self-assessment. But this is a per contract basis. So if you're dealing with a contract that has just very limited non-sensitive CUI, but you also want to win other contracts, my advice is you really just focus on getting certified. Don't, even if you get one contract that says you can be self-assessed, they're if you only do that, then you're taking yourself out of running for all the other contracts that do need to have certification. If you get the certification, then you qualify for everything, all the level 2s and all the level 1s. So it's just a much better approach. So I think very, very few companies are going to be interested in the self-assessment long term. But that, once you get self-assessed, that's a 3-year validation. So you only need to go through that assessment once by the third party for 3 years. But every year you have to self-attest that you still have all the controls in place. Any questions about that, Frank, or should I go on?
You mentioned just sort of the time to take, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit further, but I'm curious about, those that need to get level 2 certified, how long does that typically taking, or do we have any idea? Is that, if an MSP is wanting to do that, is it just, what process do they need and how long could that take?
Yeah, it really varies greatly on how much dedication you can put into it, how many resources you can put on it. Some companies, if they have CUI in limited places and they use third parties like cloud service providers or that are themselves CMMC certified, companies have gotten through the whole process in a few months. But some companies take a year to 2 years if they have very limited time to spend on getting certified. So
can you can you be along the path, can you be in process and still maintain your contracts? Might not get any new contracts, but if you're making progress towards it, can you, is there allowance to let that happen?
Yeah, the contracts that are already awarded are good for usually like 3 years. So the contracts that are out there, they're not going to take away. This is the new rule that just came out, the 48 CFR, that is going to start putting the requirement in new contracts. So there's not a big worry about losing the current contracts are already in place.
Gotcha.
So just real quickly to mention level 3. Level 3 is really only for the highest sensitive CUI, really critical programs. So it's not going to impact a lot of companies, but those companies that need to go through that, they need to first get level 2 certified and then apply for the DoD for the DIBCAC, which is the group in the DoD that actually does assessments, to come out and check you for the additional requirements beyond level 2. So you got to go through the level 2 process and then go through another assessment by the DoD itself.
Got it. Okay. So we had a couple of things come in. One from Mitch. Thanks, Mitch. His self-certification is not at the contract level; it is at the program level. All contract for that program have the same assessment requirement. Does that make sense to you, Wayne? Is that how you would view it?
I'm not sure about that really. I know each contract is going to issue a requirement for what level of CMMC you need to be compliant for. So I'd have to know more about the program concept.
Gotcha. And then the other question, again, kind of along this path of, okay, yeah, it might take a long time, but an MSP or a typical channel partner, what's the best place? Where is the best place, or what? How do they get certified? Is there, can you go to a class, if you will, right? Or is there just a lot of work and you got to, show off? And who do you, what's, I guess, a little bit more of that process?
Yeah, the process to get certified is, like we were saying, it has to be performed by a approved C3 PAO, who are kind of assessment auditing groups that are approved to do that assessment. And it's a costly process to go through. Most companies, I think it's a really great suggestion to go through Readiness first, like to have somebody that will more work with you for guidance and handholding and just work with you as a partner to help you get ready. Because when you go through the C3 PAO assessment, right now they're all backlogged. They have months of people waiting. So even if you wanted to be assessed, you'd have to wait. But they are not allowed to give you any guidance. So they just check what you've done and pass you or don't pass you.
Right.
So it's good to get kind of a good sense that you are going to pass. You have everything in place before you go to them. Because if they fail you, then you just got to, well, if you have just certain small amount of things in place, they can put those things on a poem, kind of a to-do list of things you've got to accomplish, and they give you just a few months to get that done.
Yeah.
But if you have a good amount of things, or some things can't go on a poem, then you've got to just basically start over and repay the fee again and wait again. So it's real important to make sure you're ready before you go to them.
Yeah. So just to throw in a this paid sponsorship ad from our sponsor here, our company, that is what we do, and that's what you're doing increasingly now. If you for compliance readiness or CMMC readiness in particular, that is a service that IGI or Infinite Group Inc. We provide. So we'll be following up afterwards with some content and information. We're not going to go too much deeper in what we provide today. We want to keep this educational, but do keep an eye out for that and reach out to us if you've got an urgent need. Okay, so I think we kind of answered this, but let's just ask it a different way. So, as an MSP or a provider to somebody that they know needs to be CMMC certified. Is compliant a right word, or is it really certified? Maybe make a distinction for, a partner that, our typical MSP managed service provider.
It's definitely compliance, because you do need to comply with all of the requirements. For the CMMC level 2, there's, I think, 110 practices that they have to comply with, but in reality, each practice has set things you have to do for each control, so sub-controls. And the actual objectives that are under the practices, there's like 220 of them, or no, 320, I think. So there's just a lot of things to make sure you have in place and understand.
Yeah, no, that's dizzying, to say the least. But I like the idea of compliant, and then if I mean, the rules, those 15 basics, right? They're the right things to do one way or the other. Whether you never dealt with the department, any federal government department, those are good 15 pieces of cybersecurity to practice anyway. So if you're compliant with those, then but an opportunity comes up, then you can at least confirmably, say that you can attest and be a level 1.
Yeah, to really answer your question, I guess you've got to be compliant, but then you've got to prove that you're compliant. So that's the certification part. So the right answer to you is both, really.
Yeah, no, good. Okay, so let's just talk about kind of what needs. Again, maybe we'll go a little deeper on this, and then we'll go into some submitted questions. But how can an MSP support their clients, or I mean, it's a lot of readiness, right? It's a lot of compliance. It's sort of figuring out what they can do, but ultimately it's asking their customers, or maybe it's a point of advising their customers, hey, if you're doing this kind of business, here's what you need to be doing, right? It could be an opportunity to go back into them and say, you want to keep your Department of Defense business, here's what you need to do, and I can help you.
Yeah, and it matters really how the MSP wants to be structured. MSPs are taking a variety of approaches. Some are saying, I can help you get ready, which is there's a lot of work to do to help someone get ready. And some say, this is a thing that universally kind of all MSPs that have customers that need to be CMMC compliant are doing, is basically saying, I can help you to get your controls in place and help you manage those controls. That's a great, revenue source, because there's new controls they don't have. They need to have them in place. MSPs can help them to manage that. There's a lot of MSPs that are saying, that's my sweet spot. I'm a managed service provider, so I can help add these new controls and help manage that for customers. And I'll partner with somebody that does the readiness work, so we can work together and really help the customers. So those are two different approaches. And there's some MSPs that are going even further and saying, I can actually build the infrastructure that is CMMC compliant, and I can help run these and provide these controls for the customers. But that method is the method that really will take the most time to set up, the most expense. And in that case, you yourself, the MSP, has to get a CMM certification.
Okay. Well, I think that leads into one of the questions that was just raised up from Scott. So, he's asking, so if we have CMMC 2 level customers, as their MSP, we must be certified as well, even if we do not have access to CSI.
No, that's not always the case. But if so that was the rule. What you had just read off, Frank, was the rule, but it changed when the CMMC was published end of last year. And now the MSP only is required to be CMMC certified themselves if they have their own DoD contracts So if you're a DoD contractor, DoD subcontractor yourself, then you got to be certified. Or if you, oh, here's a little chart I made. So that's hopefully will make it really simple. But the other situation is if you as the MSP in your environment have the CUI and FCI, then you got to be CMMC certified yourself. Otherwise, you could be. I mean, there's a lot of MSPs talking about becoming CMMC certified, even though they don't meet any of those two requirements. And the reason why is that if you support these customers that have CMMC requirements and you're not CMMC certified, then you need to participate in the assessments of your customers. So if you do some controls for the customers, you know, it's great. You made some more revenue because you implemented some new controls for the customers they needed for CMMC. But now, if you're not CMMC certified yourself, then the customer can't just say, I'm using a CMMC certified MSP. So you will have to first minimally provide what's called a responsibility or shared responsibility matrix, which is a document that describes all the CMMC controls that you're responsible for. And then you'll have to provide some evidence, and you may have to be in some interviews. And it doesn't sound like a huge deal, but if you've got multiple customers that need to be CMMC compliant, and you got to participate in all those interviews for all those customers, yeah, it's easier just to get CMMC compliant yourself. Then you don't have to be in any of those interviews anymore and supply any more evidence. You just say, I'm CMMC compliant, and that's all you need to do.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
It's a good approach.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the questions pre-submitted was, is CMMC going to really come to fruition? And I think the clear answer is yes, it's here now. What is there, so you talked about it a little bit before, but maybe clarify again some of the deadlines that are coming up relative to, you know, somebody that needs to be certified, you know, is it just on contract renewals? Is it on new contracts, or is currently required? Can maybe clarify the timings?
Yeah, and that comes back, Frank, to the phased rollout of CMMC. Like, it's not like on November 10th when CMMC is effective and they're going to start putting in contracts. It's not like it all is going to hit that day. So we got this phase rollout. You guys that are looking online can see the chart. And this, I just wanted to kind of say that this is not anything official, this chart. It's something I put together on my interpretation, my personal interpretation of what's happening out there. But basically in phase one, which is the first year, from November of this year through till November 10th of next year, in that period, the DoD can start to require in all contracts that level one companies have done their self-assessment. But what you hear and read about whenever you look into any of this is the term DoD discretion. So DoD can decide how they roll it out. They can roll it out to only 10% of the contracts, or, you know, it's totally what they decide. I colored the level one bright green and level two kind of a lighter green, because I think my personal thought is that, you know, the requirement for self-assessment level one is going to be higher, a higher percentage of the contracts than the level two. Although, you know, DoD could legally start to require all contracts on November 10th, or they could require only 1%. They decide which ones they start to put it in. And I think a lot of it, you know, we all probably realize a lot of it is based upon, you know, if they have a need for a new contract and there's nobody certified yet, then they may, you know, not put it.
There's going to be some exceptions made, but yeah.
Yeah. So they're going to make some exceptions, but it's going to start rolling out anyway this year for a self-assessments only. But DoD has the legal right to start including that you have to be certified by a C3PO this year. So they could require some. Everyone I hear from is that it's going to be a very low percentage, but they could start to require some certifications in contracts in this next year. But in phase 2, you're going to see that, much more of the self-assessments required for level 1, if not all. You're going to see more in not only level 2 self-assessments, but you're going to see that they start to phase in that they're requiring the actual C3 PAO assessment. So that's where we're going to start to see the reliance drop on the self-assessment, pick up in year 2 on the C3 PAO. In year 3, everything's just going to get even stronger. Probably, I would guess that almost all of the level 1 self-assessments in phase 3 will be required, and a very high, if not all, of the level 2. It's all dependent upon, are there enough contractors with the certification to meet the DoD needs?
Yeah.
But the goal is within 4 years, starting November of 2028, to fully require everything, no exceptions across the board. Until then, it's all DoD discretion of which ones they included and how they include it.
Wow. Yeah, so this is real. This is happening with but I like the phased approach. It does addresses reality a bit, whereas government rules and regulations don't always deal with reality. They just get out there. Some of the other questions, we are going to be providing a couple tools and checklists as a follow-up. They kept coming out tomorrow. But maybe kind of take it back a little bit, Wayne, and maybe talk a little bit about our own services. But if an MSP is looking to build a compliance as a service, right? Where would they start? Any particular elements there? It's, if nothing else, I think it's mostly a lot of identification, being able to analyze an existing environment and know what different compliance standards are and be able to apply them to that customer. But any sort of general thoughts about how to build a compliance as a service offering?
Yeah, well, let me address it a couple ways, and you can tell me if I'm going away from how you wanted it addressed. But we talked already about an MSP. Definitely, a big advantage for MSPs. If you have customers going for CMMC compliance, you can start to offer new services to them. As far on the compliance side that you were just talking about, Frank, they could also, as far as CMMC, they could say, well, we'll help you get ready also. So I just want to talk a little bit about what that means. So if you're going to, on the contracting side, if you're going to help people to get ready, you need to help them scope their environment, understand what's in scope, what's not in scope, and that's people, locations, network systems. It's the big picture. Also, you've got to make sure that they have policies and procedures in place. Some customers are going to want help building their policies and their procedures. They have to be done based upon echoing the CMMC practices and objectives and have evidence backing it up. You've got to build a system security plan, very detailed document that talks about every single requirement, every single objective, what the companies are doing about it, who's responsible. Got to build a customer responsibility matrix that's saying for every single one of like the 320 objectives, who is responsible. Maybe the customer is responsible, maybe a certain third party is responsible. So you got to make that document really pulled together from the different third parties involved. Collect all the evidence. You got to have at least 2 types of evidence collected for every type of CMMC practice to prove that it's really in place. And I got listed down here that it could be examine, test, or interview. Examine is basically, what's your screenshots, what's your reports, what's your policies, evidence of showing it works, or interviewing people responsible for it. Poem is the list of all the things that are not in place, who's going to do them, when they're going to be done by. Got to come up with a SPRS score if you're doing a self-assessment. It's basically scoring all the different practices, and then implement and operate the new roles. But that's really the solid MSP role of, what you're already doing, just expanding on that and helping the customer and getting yourself some more revenue of running these new controls that need to be put in place. So I wanted to let people know, that's a lot of work. So you need to, as MSPs, make a decision. Do you want to take that on and build up that practice? Do you want to partner with someone like an IGI that does that side of the business and can work with you? But on the CMMC side, that answers your question, I think, Frank. But then overall, if you're just talking more generally, I think one of the key requirements to having a compliance as a service is really to have a GRC system and manage your customer's security roadmap in that tool.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, a couple questions come up. One, the presentation. Yeah, we're gonna send out tomorrow the slides or a couple of these key points, along with a couple of checklist thing that we're working on. So we'll be on the lookout for that. And we are recording this session, and it'll be available for watching afterwards, usually by the end of the day today, or for sure tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for those. We got so question: how does this affect my follow the sun 24/7 support? Does it affect what they're providing for their customers? I guess probably if they're doing that, they're doing it, right? It shouldn't matter. Shouldn't be any ramifications for CMMC, was there?
I haven't really run into that question before yet. I know CMMC is, just for the US, for the DoD, but some providers and some contractors of the DoD are global. So I'm not really sure how it would affect the follow the sun approach, but the controls do have to be maintained 24/7. So it's, definitely would be great to build into that approach.
Well, and ultimately, right? I mean, if these controls are in at one spot, they're going to be implemented around the world as well. So, I mean, the individual countries where these contractors might be, I'm thinking of a base, somebody in the Philippines, right, supporting them, right? They're going to need some levels of requirements there to be a supplier still. So, the company itself, I'm sure will keep, do what's right in one place and make it right for all the places. They don't want to limit their business opportunity. Okay, so let's see. So this is actually kind of a good one, and it kind of goes against the amount of work needed and what the return might be, but also part of the liability, right? So the question was concerned about increasing my MSP's liability exposure by helping clients achieve CMMC. Can you speak to this? Right. So I think if you're just helping, you're just helping, right? You're not being the provider, but that's kind of this compliance as a service. It's a component of that, right? Maybe you want to talk through that a little bit more?
Yeah, there is some liability, especially when it comes back to the False Claims Act. Because I guess the most general statement I can make is just never, inflate your controls. Just be really honest about what your controls do and what they don't do. If you tell the government you've got a control and you're managing a certain way, you've got to have that control. Because if there is a breach, or the government finds out that the control they contractually feel they're paying for isn't in place, I mean, that liability can directly come back to you.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, I think we talked about where some of maybe you have some other resources, but what's the best way to get started with CMMC requirements? This one question was about, they've done a lot of HIPAA work, but, is there a self-help CMMC guide? I know Mike Semmel Consulting does some help, particularly for MSPs, but anything else you know of or familiar with that can help get started?
Well, the very best way that, how we help customers normally is to just start with a self-assessment or a readiness assessment. So basically, based upon what scope you have and what level of CMMC that you want to get compliant with, really just do a check of the controls. And what we end up finding with a lot of companies is they just don't understand the requirements. So there's, like we said, 110 different practices, 320 objectives, but a lot of the customers don't know how to interpret what the requirement is really asking for. But to understand what it's asking for, understand your environment, what's in scope, and to do an assessment is the best way to know how far you are and how much work you might have to get there. So I would always start with that readiness assessment.
Yeah. And again, that's not to be too self-serving here, but that is something that we provide, and happy to help any of the MSP or maybe even your customer. If you just need to sort of repackage the services, we can do that. Okay, I think we covered pretty much. Anything else, Wayne? We want to, again, we'll be following up. We'll provide our contact information here in a second, but anything else you wanted to sort of just hit home, just to reiterate? Most people that have started with us have stayed with us, so it's awesome. It means they're valuable information. So maybe reiterate and summarize a little bit some of the key things that you want to get across.
Yeah, I think we did cover most of the main points, so you should have at least a good understanding of how complex it is. And there's rules and sub-rules to everything. So if there's anything that you want to know more about or any questions, don't hesitate to come back to us. I'm just looking through some of my notes here to see if there's anything that we missed.
I think for me the biggest thing is that, yes, this is real. 2, it's not all or nothing. On October 1st, there is a phased approach that has, that provides it, but you really need to, as an MSP, really need to look at where, what you're providing today. Is there pieces that you have to outsource just because you don't have the staff resources or anything else to get there? But it's coming, and again, if you've got any customer that's related to this, you need to at least get in and do some either a self-assessment or get an outside assessment and see what you need to do, because it's likely if you're reaching these at all, then you need to do something.
Yeah, I did just think of one other thing, Frank, that we can let the folks know, because most of the people on the call are MSPs. One thing you could consider, and I think this, from my interaction with this group, there's a really good group to at least be familiar with. Fairly new group called the MSP Collective. So it's mspcollective.org is their website. And it is, as far as I know, the only listing of CMMC certified MSPs. So if some company is looking for, wow, I really want to offload this work I'm doing, but I don't want to, I want to adopt the controls as much as I can. I want someone to do it for me. That is the only place I know of that has a listing of the MSPs that are certified. And if you want to go that direction yourself or know more or be in a community of people that are talking about that, it's a pretty good group just to get familiar with.
Great, thank you. That's a good resource. Okay, Wayne, if you want to just provide your email, and I'll write up or send out mine. But again, we are going to be following up with a one pager with some key points and terms, and I think a couple of those slides in there will be built into it. If you're interested in learning more about IGI, it's just igicybersecurity.com, and we would be happy to do there. If you're wanting to watch this on record or share it with your friends, if you go to nodeware.com/franklyspeaking, you can go and see past episodes of, again, the last month's one. If you're in this space, you might be also interested in our last month's discussion around adding cyber professional services to your mix, either directly or through a supplier like us. So take a look through there. Again, my email is FRAIMONDI@igius.com. And Wayne, if you want to give your final thoughts and comments and email.
Yeah, so my email is wproctor@igius.com. And yeah, just if you guys have any things you want to talk about, as a super interesting subject, and I think it's really key for companies like us to partner with MSPs, because we all need to work together to bring the customers the best service. So yeah, if there's anything you want to talk about, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, I just had a brainstorm idea. Maybe in a few weeks we do just an open office hours, just an open forum, just people come in and ask a simple question, come and go, or rather than a formal thing here. Maybe that's a good just practice to get underway. So I'll look into that. But anyway, again, thank you, Wayne, for your expertise and your value here. It's been a great learning session. Hopefully everybody has joined it and enjoyed it as well. And we'll be back next month. Specific date to be determined, but we're looking at some cyber hygiene topics on how to be better and safer at the get-go, left of boom, and preventing risks. So stay tuned in your inbox for that. And again, I'll thank you very much for your participation and attendance today. And be safe out there.